Boom, we're rolling. KK Fischer is back. You were one of the biggest guests that I've had. Like everyone loved you. Everyone loved our conversation, but I think it was you they loved and it wasn't me. So,
I don't know about that.
oh, I'm positive. I'm positive. So I'm happy to have you back. And yeah, we're going to talk about all things running and everything that's been going on over the last year. I know that you've had some ups and downs and some tragedy in your life. And I mean, I want to hear about it. And as you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I would love to get into that too. And, you know, I'm not going to ask you to do all the talking. If you're going to be vulnerable, I'll be vulnerable too. But yeah, man. So I just want to talk about everything. But first and foremost, how's your running going? Or have you been running?
I have been running. Running
Okay.
has been a saving grace for me. And I'm really grateful. I think, you know, I work with a coach, TJ David out of Colorado. He's a part of this group called Microcosm Coaching, which is really, it's fitting that we're talking about mental health because it has a really heavy mental health emphasis.
Okay.
And so he really takes a lot of things into account when he's building out a training plan, but he takes into account kind of mental health aspects as well. And so every day when I'm running, I have to put in how I'm feeling psychologically as well. And he will adjust my schedule if I'm having a really hard day or need some more miles to kind of lift my spirits, what have you.
Interesting.
But I'm training for Cruel Jewel 100, which is coming up.
Nice. Okay, cool.
Which should be a pretty hard one, but I'm excited about that. That was actually supposed to be my first 100-miler last year, and it got canceled because of COVID. So I got the rollover, and I'm going back east in 2 weeks, and so just kind of training for that.
Nice.
Keeping chugging along. How's your running going?
Oh, it's good. It's good. I've been getting out pretty steady. Let's see. What did I do today? I ran 7 miles this morning at this place called Batasso Preserve here in Boulder. Beautiful trail run, really quiet this morning when I was there. It's this really peaceful place where it's just like rolling hills and you're pretty much in the woods the whole time. It was just quiet, peaceful. It was like I could kind of knock out my run and my quiet time and meditation all in one shot. So it was good. So I've been getting out pretty much every day. I'm doing like, I don't know, 50 miles a week, maybe ish, something like that. So I'm plugging along. Yeah.
That's great. Are you training for anything specific?
I'm doing the Sangre de Cristo 200 in September.
Oh, wow. Big one. That's exciting.
Compared to what you've done. Come on, KK.
They're all intense, you know, no matter which way you cut it.
Well, I was going to say, like, Cruel Jewel should be a walk in the park, right?
I don't know. The heat and humidity I'm quite nervous about, but it is what it is, and it'll be a new challenge, that's for sure.
I did that race like 3 or 4 years, probably, well, no, actually it was 5 years ago. And it wasn't particularly hot. And everyone told me it was going to be really technical, and it wasn't as technical as I anticipated. So, yeah.
Good to know.
But it is all up and down. There is like zero flat. So I hope you like climbing.
I do, but
cool.
Yeah.
Good. Tell me about your coach and how he incorporates mental health into your training. I mean, is it just checking in with you on a daily basis, or does he have any special qualifications with that?
That's a great question. I don't know if he has any special qualifications. He certainly seems to have lots of expertise in that area, just based on kind of the way he interacts with me and the rest of the community. One of the things that's really cool about the group is it's called Microcosm Community, and all the coachees, the people that are coached by TJ and Zoe and the other coaches in the group, have 2 community calls a week. And so there's kind of this little community that's been established, and people can talk to each other, and the calls have different themes. So maybe it's about hydration, or maybe it's about body image stuff, or maybe it's about depression. Each week there's some sort of cool, interesting topic that we get to connect on. So to answer your question, how does he incorporate sort of mental health into the training? I think one, having the logs every single day, I have to put into my log with him how I'm feeling, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, share what's going on in my life. So he's like fully in the loop on all my ups and downs all the time. And then he's responding back to me on those and adjusting my schedule accordingly, because there's a lot of evidence that this is not new information by any means, that stress, other types of stress, not just physical stress, but stress, at work, or stress with your family, or romantic stress, wherever you have stress, can also have a negative impact on your body. So you want to take that into account when you're thinking about a training plan. And so it's really cool that the coaches there kind of really craft that into the training plan and adapt the schedule accordingly. And then I think the other really awesome part that's great for mental health is the community. And I think one of the things that is so important for having sort of a healthy mental health program, if you will, is to have a really good community. And I think that's one of the things that's been so hard during COVID, is that we've just not been able to see people in the way we have historically. And so the community at Microcosm Coaching has been really nice to have that as a place to feel like, okay, these are my people, they understand me. As it's like the ultra runner mind it's a particular breed of human mind. And so it's like nice to be among people that understand you. So I think that's kind of the gist of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. That's interesting. I've never thought of that. I should incorporate more of that into my coaching. But that's cool. How is your mental health, and how are you psychologically after everything you've been through throughout the year? Are you holding up okay?
Yeah, I mean, all things considering, yes, but I think, gosh, how do I answer this question? It's a loaded question. I mean, I think, as you know, this past January, I lost. It's interesting, when I was on the podcast with you last time, we were talking about the fact that I had just gotten engaged to Lucas.
Right.
And that was a quite exciting, interesting love story and saga, given that I had just been in this relationship with someone else. And then Lucas and I, who had this previous relationship, then got engaged. And I guess just to kind of bring you up to speed to today, Lucas and I got engaged right before I went to Moab, and he ended up coming to Moab and being there for a good chunk of the race. And then he basically moved in with me in my home in San Bruno, and we were living together, and it was really wonderful. He had, when we were together the first time, we were very much in love with each other, but we were having a lot of relationship issues. Part of that was completely my fault, that I was struggling with trying to stop drinking. And so we started to see a therapist together who was amazing. And actually, you'll like this a lot. She did therapy on the run. Literally, we would go on runs with her and we would do therapy. Wow. And it was super cool and fun. And when we broke up this is January of 2020, he ended up seeing her on his own as his personal therapist. So he saw her through the whole year. So when we got back together, he had his personal therapist, who's amazing. I adore her. Really awesome, great woman. And then I had my therapist. And then we were hunting for someone together. And that was Lucas's idea. He was like, this is really important. We need to have a relationship therapist together. Let's work on this. We've had some issues in the past communicating clearly. So we were interviewing therapists to go see together, and we found this woman that we really liked. And she, just the state of the world, this is kind of sad, but the state of the world was, we reached out to her, I think maybe in early December, when we had talked to her and said, great, we're ready to move forward. Can we book a session with you? And she's like, oh, great. I'm booking for late February. That's when my first opening is. This was back in December. But I think, just given how much mental health, need there is right now, and there has been, given everything that's happening in the world, people are just booked out. So we didn't end up seeing her together, very sadly. And then, as you know, and probably most people know, he disappeared on December 24th, and then a body was found in the San Francisco Bay on January 11th. And that experience has been extremely difficult, as you might imagine. And I think it's interesting that we're here talking about mental health, because I think that this experience, which is definitely a tragedy and has been a very large trauma for me, has really forced me to work on my mental health, almost full time. And I know that probably in some day in the future, I will look back and I'll say, I'm grateful, that this happened and that it's made me a stronger person. I'm not quite there yet. I'm still pretty in it.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to remind myself that this is, I have this general belief about the universe. I don't know if it's really true or not, but it's helpful for for how to view things, is that the universe will only throw something at someone if they can handle it.
Yes.
And so I've been trying to remind myself that this is something that's here to teach me a lot. All the cliche things they tell you, like, oh, there's a silver lining, and when God closes a door, he opens a window, and all those, excuse my language, bullshit phrases that people say. I'm like trying to remind myself of those things and really remind myself that this is going to make me stronger in the end. So through this time, since January to now, my mental health has almost been a full-time job. I did start a new job. I think when we were talking in the fall, I don't know if we talked about my career at all in the fall,
I don't think so.
Okay. So last summer, I had quit my job working in finance. I'd worked in asset management in all sorts of different roles for my entire career, and quit my job last summer. I was like, you know what? This is not what lights my heart on fire. I want to do something else, probably something related to running. I'm going to take a risk and quit my job, see what happens. And when Lucas disappeared, I did not have a job at the time. I was what I called fun employed, having lots of fun, running, but getting a little anxious about, how I was going to start paying the bills. But I had been talking to this company, Method 7, that makes sunglasses they're really called technical eyewear for cannabis growers and for pilots. And they want to make a line of glasses for ultra runners. Oh, cool. So they brought me on to help build out that product line and think about what kind of product we want, who are the right ambassadors that we want to have, what events do we want to be at, what's our go-to-market strategy. So I've been talking to James, who's the CEO of that company, kind of all fall, and I wasn't really sure if that was going to turn into anything. But in sort of, I guess, early February, we ended up signing a contract, and I'm working with them as kind of a contractor. Cool. Very, very part-time. But it's been very, very part-time, which in some ways has been hard, because I think if I had a full-time job, that would be a distraction in a way from dealing with a lot of the processing of the loss of Lucas. But I think the fact that it's really been kind of only 5 to 10 hours a week has forced me to have all this time, have a lot of time to focus on really working on myself and really processing through this and really sitting with those hard feelings and doing the work. And man, it has been really difficult. And but I think necessary. I think that other people that I've heard that have gone through a traumatic loss like this sometimes have said that, it's not easy to, but to focus on something else in the short term can distract yourself and distract your mind, but that those feelings eventually have to be processed. They have to, you have to grieve, you have to, deal with them. So, that's a very long-winded answer to your question. How am I doing psychologically? I would say, today is a good day. I'm feeling good today. And I think generally I've gotten myself to a more equanimous place. But for a while it was a lot of ups and downs. Somebody, actually Lucas's mother, who I'm very close with, her name is Jan. Her and I were on the phone a couple weeks ago, and a friend of hers had told her that dealing with loss is kind of like it's like a series of tsunamis. And the tsunami comes and it like destroys everything. Everything is destroyed. It seems like it's never going to be able to be rebuilt. It's over. There's lots of destruction in the process. And then the water recedes and it's calm again. And what happens when you have this loss is that those tsunamis, the distance between them will increase, but they still come with this like super intense kind of just like total destruction. Everything's awful. It'll never be fixed. You'll always feel this way kind of feeling. And then it recedes and it's calm again. So I've had this experience multiple times. Well, I feel like I've sort of tricked myself, not knowingly, but have thought, oh gosh, I really feel better now. I feel like, okay, I'm at peace with this. Maybe I'm on the other side of it. And then I get hit with one of these again, and it just like totally sidelines me. And I think one of the real keys for me has been to accept that there will be another tsunami. Like right now, I'm feeling good. Today's a good day. And the last week has been a good day. There have been moments when I've been sad, of course, but not like so sad I couldn't do anything type of sad.
Right.
But I feel like now I have an awareness that, okay, there will be another time when I just feel so terrible that I can't do anything. And I need to be okay with that. And I need to have, a plan for what I'm going to do when that happens. Am I going to call someone? Am I going to try to go for a walk? Am I going to, so not having the expectation that I'm on the other side of it. And probably I never will be on the other side of it, I think. I mean, maybe the distance between the tsunamis gets so large that it's, years, hopefully at some point, but probably there's something that could trigger me even, 15 years from now that would make me feel that same rush of loss and pain. So long-winded answer to your question. But I'm doing okay. Good.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and I understand loss to, a certain extent. And my heart went out to you when I kind of heard what was going on. And of course I just hear things through Instagram, and I didn't really know the details. Are you willing to talk about the details, or what happened, or how did it all go down?
Yeah, I'm happy to share, and I'm particularly happy to share because I think I think there might be some misinformation about what actually happened, and it's a rather confusing thing because he is a very special human and is very eccentric, which is what I loved about him. And so some people have been like, well, that's so weird. How could that have happened? So anyways, I'm happy to share any of the details of it. Do you want me to kind of walk through what happened, or what would be?
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, you don't have to give us the 9-hour version, but sure, definitely, definitely break it down for us and let us know what happened. And by the way, isn't it always the special, most beautiful people that always get taken away from us early?
I know.
It's like the assholes that it's like your neighbor that's an asshole. Those are the people that are going to live to be 90, and they're always going to be assholes, right? But it's like the special, most beautiful souls, the ones that you want to be with or you want to be like, those are the ones that are always taken away so early. And like I've started to sort of recognize that, and I don't know why that is, but like now when I see those sort of people, I'm just like, give me a hug, man. Like, I don't know if you're going to be here forever because you're a special one, but anyways, yeah, please, tell us.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we moved in together and we're living together in my house in San Bruno, and we were planning to get married in the spring, but had filed our domestic partnership with the state of California because I didn't have a job and I didn't have health insurance. And so I needed health insurance. Mm-hmm. So we were being practical, and my kids too had been on my health insurance previously. And so we were just on COBRA at the time, which is extremely expensive. So we filed our domestic partnership. We're planning to get married in the spring, and me and the girls went on Lucas's health insurance. And then things were just really wonderful and magical between the two of us. I think like a lot of the struggles that we had the first time around in our relationship we were both had a lot of awareness around them, and we were working on them. And as I mentioned, there were still things that, we would argue about, or things that would snag in the system, but we were trying to meet with a therapist to work on those. And it was nothing that wasn't workable, in my opinion. And things were really good. And that day, this is one of the hardest things for me. One of the hardest things for me has been the fact that we got in a fight the day that he disappeared. And the last thing that I said to him face to face was to get out of my car. And I'll kind of tell you what happened there, but that's been, from a mental health standpoint, that's been pretty awful to have to try to process through, because, and when you talk about kind of the stages of grief, this would be in like the bargaining stage of grief. Like if only I had not asked him to get out of the car, if only I had been nicer and said, oh, let's do XYZ instead, like maybe he'd still be here. But that rabbit hole doesn't change the situation, but it's a really destructive one psychologically to spend a lot of time down. And I spent a lot of time down it, unfortunately. And it's put me in some really bad places psychologically. But what happened that day, it was Christmas Eve. And he had said to me, oh, are you available to go on an excursion at noon or to 11 a.m. that day? I have a surprise for you. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but when I went over to the boat, he has a boat in the Emeryville Marina that he had to go pick something up at. And I met him there, and then we drove together. He told me that he had arranged to buy a meteor from a meteor expert. And I am like totally space obsessed. I went to space camp as a kid. I love the moon. I'm super into like all things like astronomy. So I was so pumped about this, to go meet this meteor expert and learn about meteors and meteorites and meteoroids. And I was super pumped. But when we were in the car, we were just kind of bickering. I don't even really know what it was about, and it's not even really relevant, but we were arguing, and I pulled off the highway. I was driving, I pulled off the highway, and we were driving out towards Sacramento. So I pulled off and went into this Costco parking lot and parked and said, maybe we should just each go for a walk and cool down, and then let's try to talk about it. And so we went and did that, and we both went for a walk, and we pushed the Meteor appointment back. And then I called him, or we were texting, I think. And I texted him, and I went and picked him up where he had walked to, and he got back in the car. And again, the mood was just like, we just like couldn't get on the same page at all. Like, and what was happening in my mind, I don't know what was happening in his mind, obviously, but what was happening in my mind is, I'm committed to this relationship, but I don't want to reinforce negative behaviors. And so I don't want, if we're not communicating well and we're arguing with each other, that's not good behavior to be practicing together. I want this relationship to be forever and always. And so, if we're not able to communicate well together, let's just take some time apart. That was my perspective. And I was trying my best to say that clearly and, without anger. And it just seemed that we couldn't kind of talk eye to eye. We couldn't see eye to eye. We couldn't sort of communicate well. And so I remember I pulled over to the side of the road. We hadn't gotten back on the highway yet. And I said, listen, I think it's better if we just take the rest of the day off. Let's see how we feel in a couple hours. I love you. I think, walk home to the boat and we'll talk later. And we were probably like, I don't know, probably 3 miles from his boat, but he runs like 50 miles on a whim. So that's no big deal for him. Right. And then I went to Sacramento and tried to pick up the Meteor because we had this appointment with the Meteor guy. And I didn't realize how expensive the Meteor was. It was going to be $550. And I had some cash in my wallet, but I didn't have that much money. So I was like, okay, this is awesome. This is super cool. I'm so excited. Let's come back on Saturday. We'll come back on Saturday. So I text Lucas. I said, thank you so much. I met with with this guy. So cool. What a thoughtful present. I'm really excited. Let's go back on Saturday and do it together. I love you. And he said something like, I'm talking to my mom. I knew you'd love it. I'm planning to come over tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And I'm not getting this verbatim. It's just from my memory, but something like, I'm going to go hang out with my neighbor. It was Christmas Eve. So I was going back to my house to prepare Christmas presents for my children. And he said, if you want to come over to the boat, you're welcome to. I'm going to hang out with my neighbor. And if not, I'm planning to come over at 7 a.m. the next morning. Because at 7 a.m. we had started this little tradition where every morning at 7, we would go do a loop around my block, this 1 mile loop around my block. And on that walk, we would do 3 things that we are grateful for. That was like our little morning ritual together. And then we'd come back to the house and he'd make coffee and breakfast. So I was expecting him to come for that 7 a.m. walk. And in my mind, I had thought, okay, I don't know if I apologized. I think I apologized in that sort of long text about the Meteor. He seemed to be good. We seemed to be kind of cleared the air. I was then focusing on preparing Christmas presents for my kids. Then I went back home. I did the Christmas Eve thing. And then the next morning he didn't show up at 7. And I tried calling him, but his phone was off, which isn't that unusual for him. For him, like he often would forget to charge his phone and his alarm wouldn't go off. So he, end up sleeping in. So I was like, okay, he's just slept in. When he wakes up, he'll come over. But at 8 o'clock, we had a Zoom call with his parents, with his whole family, like a Christmas Zoom call. So he hadn't showed up by 8. And I was like, okay, maybe he's just going to get on the Zoom call over at the boat and I'll just get on here. So I got on the Zoom call with his family and he wasn't there. And then I was a little bit worried. I was like, that's weird. But he still might have just slept in and not thought about it, like if he'd stayed up really late. And so then after that, I texted this other friend of mine, Dan, who Lucas knew quite well, and said, hey, I haven't heard anything from Lucas. Do you think I should be worried? Should I go over to the boat? And we were supposed to go see my kids that afternoon. We were going to go to my ex-husband's house and spend Christmas Day afternoon with them. And so I knew, in my mind, I thought, okay, he'll definitely come here before that, because we had planned on doing that together, and that was really important. And Dan was like, yeah, I'm sure he's fine. Like, don't worry about it. He'll be there before you guys go to Stefan's house. I was like, okay. So I think Dan had to come stop by the house and do a few things, because Dan was actually going to rent a room I have a guest bedroom. He was going to rent a room in my guest bedroom for the month of January, because he was kind of in between places. So he's dropping some stuff off, and we were chatting. And then at like 1:30, Lucas still wasn't there, but I was supposed to be at my ex-husband's house at 2, and I was starting to feel a little weird and off. Like, I just was like, wow, this is really weird that Lucas wouldn't be here. But I didn't have enough time to drive over to the boat before I needed to be at my kids for Christmas. And I didn't, like, this never crossed my mind what had happened. So I go over to my ex-husband's house. I spend Christmas Eve Christmas Day afternoon with my kids and my ex-husband and our au pair, and we do a Zoom call with my parents who are in Florida. And I just am feeling just like very anxious and off. I don't know what's going on with Lucas. I'm worried about him. And so I'm there for maybe 2 hours, but then I say to Stefan, hey, I need to go check on Lucas. So then I go drive to the boat, and I get to the boat and he's not there. And I was like, that's so weird. I was just really in shock. Like, I didn't really know. I wasn't panicking at that point. Like, I didn't think that anything had happened to him, but I was just so confused. And he lived on a houseboat in the Emeryville Marina, and he had a neighbor on each side that lived in a boat. And the neighbor on one of the sides came out, 2 women. Michelle came out and said, oh, are you looking for Lucas? And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, he went out on a boat ride with Joe last night. That's the neighbor on the other side. We heard them. They were, having some drinks on Christmas Eve, and then they went out on a boat ride. Do you want me to call Joe? And I was like, yeah, can you call Joe? So they called Joe. And then I hear them talking on the phone. I hadn't met Joe before, kind of being in the marina, but I had never really talked to him substantially. And then he's like, oh, Lucas never came back to the boat? He never came back to the boat? Oh, I'm going to call the police. And hung up the phone. So apparently what had happened is that Lucas and Joe, I think Lucas wanted to go out on a boat ride on Christmas Eve. And so Joe's boat had a dinghy, like a small little boat you could take out for, 2 or 3 people or whatever. So Lucas and Joe decided around 11:30 or something to take a boat ride out of the marina, out into the San Francisco Bay. And they were out there. And what Joe said, because I subsequently then went and met Joe and went for a walk with him to hear, this was when Lucas was missing, because I wasn't sure. I was trying to figure out where he could possibly be.
Right.
So I went and met with Joe and was trying to get the information. So this is what Joe told me, is that they went out on a boat ride, which was Lucas's idea. Lucas really wanted to go. And the other weird thing is, he said Lucas was very insistent that Lucas pay for gas for the boat. So they went and got gas first, and then they went out. And then when they were out there, Lucas somehow sneaked the keys out of the boat without Joe seeing it, and hid him in his pants or something. And then suddenly took his shirt off, jumped in the water, and swam back to shore.
Whoa.
And Joe said that he could, and they were about 200 yards from the shore, 100 to 200 yards. And from the way Joe described it, it was a pretty calm night. Like it wasn't, big waves. It was pretty calm. And I went back almost every subsequent night for the next week and like looked at what the tide would have been like at that time. And it was completely flat and still. And Lucas is an expert swimmer. And he would always, this was like signature Lucas move, would be like spontaneous jump into open body of water, odd time of the day. I remember actually my first 100K I did, which was Castle Peak 100K. Do you know that race?
No, I don't.
Awesome course. You have to come up to California and do it. You can come stay with me if you need a place to crash, and then come do Castle Peak 100K. Yeah. But it's this epic course, tons of vert that goes, it's near Truckee. It goes up Castle Peak and all around these beautiful mountains, gorgeous. But that was my first 100K I did, and Lucas ran it with me. And I remember there's this lake, I can't remember the name of the lake, but it's maybe like mile 40 that we got there. And Lucas just like jumps into the water with all his clothes on, his shoes on. And he's like, come on in. It'll feel so good, because it was a pretty hot day. I think I jumped into, I can't really remember, but it was just like very typical of him to jump into water. He loved swimming. He's just kind of a spontaneous guy like that. So Joe said that because he didn't have the keys to the car or keys to the boat, Lucas had taken them out. He couldn't drive to follow Lucas. So he was trying to paddle with his arms, the boat, but he couldn't make very much, headway. He was not able to keep up with Lucas. So Lucas was swimming back to shore. And Joe said that he could see Lucas waist deep, like standing up in the shallows, kind of getting out of the water.
Okay.
But he couldn't confirm that he saw him get out of the water. But he clearly wasn't very concerned, because he didn't call the police the night before. He thought, okay, he's back to shore. Mm-hmm. He must have. So that was the story of what happened. And then when I came to the boat that next day, and Joe realized that he hadn't come back, then he called the police, and then a detective got involved, and the Emeryville Police Department was involved, and then they launched this investigation. So then from December 25th, that's what the day that the police were called, till January 11th, he was a missing person, and we were searching for him. And so we organized like a coastline search of like all the coastline all along Emeryville. We organized and this was a really incredible thing about the running community, running community and just his community in general. Actually, his company that he works for, like everybody came out from his company to help do the coastline search too. Mm-hmm. And people actually, family members, friends, all these people from like all over the country, like volunteered to come and help do the search. Like I remember there was this guy who flew drones that reached out to me and offered to come fly out from the East Coast to come like fly drones over the water. I mean, people were just incredibly helpful, and just the outpouring of support was just incredible. So that was a very intense experience, just looking for him and not knowing where he was. And during that time, I was fairly sure he was alive, because he just was such a skilled adventurer in all the ways that I never would have thought that he would have drowned. It didn't make sense to me. Now, other people are like, of course, that's what happened. How could someone not drown if they're swimming in the bay? But to me, it didn't make sense. And he had at one point said something in a text message to me when we were kind of going back and forth before he got back in the car, like when we were on our separate little walks. Mm-hmm. He sent something to me in a text message that said, I feel like I need to just have 7 days alone. Mm. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, maybe he decided he needs to have 7 days alone. also, and one other thing that made me think that he was just decided to go on a spontaneous adventure, like a spontaneous adventure by foot. That would be what he had done. Like maybe he walked to Yosemite, John Muir style. Maybe he decided to do another loop around the San Francisco Bay. He's done 2 circumnavigations of the Bay Area Ridge Trail around the whole San Francisco Bay, which is 300 miles. He's done that twice. So I thought maybe he's going for a 3rd time, just as like, but he, on a couple of occasions, he had disappeared when him and I were together, and had expected me to come follow him. And he'd never been gone for multiple days at a time, but there are a bunch of times when he was, and we had just talked about it 2 days before, actually, in his journal, which I then, once he was missing, I was looking for any clue I possibly could. So I read through his whole journal. And in his journal 2 days before, he wrote something about this conversation we had had, where he wrote, "Yes, she was right. I did want her to chase me. That's how I felt loved." Something like that. Talking about the fact that like him running away and then me coming and having to try to find him made him feel loved. And so in my mind, I was like, maybe we got in this fight. He didn't feel like I was loving him enough, and he felt like he needed a break, and he wanted to go run, and now I'm supposed to go find him. I mean, that wouldn't be great behavior, but that, I don't know, people do weird things when they're in periods of stress. Anyway, so I was really in a very heightened state of searching however I could, which was very challenging because he could have gone anywhere. And then on January 11th, they found a body in the San Francisco Bay. And the detective called me the next morning, January 12th, which was a Tuesday, to tell me that it was his. And, this is a very interesting thing. Then I didn't believe that it was him then. My brain just couldn't understand that it was his. And even to this day, I have a hard time believing that it was actually his body, which seems like a totally crazy thing. But, I think I was never allowed to ID the body that they found. They didn't let me ID it. They didn't let his parents ID it. Okay. And there's just been, so I think that part of the reason why we have, when we have a funeral and we have an open casket and we have a wake, it's like people going and seeing that loved one and being able to have this closure and understand, okay, this person is no longer here, they moved on to their next thing, whatever that is. But we didn't have that with him. We weren't allowed to see the body. And that has been an extremely difficult thing to work on with my therapist. And I see my therapist 3 times a week, and I have a psychiatrist I see once a week. And they're both very kind to me with my arguments that I think that it wasn't his body. Because there's also there's a lot of facts of the case that make me think, okay, that wasn't his body. But I think at the end of the day, I've had to just let go of that, right? Which is one of the most difficult things. I needed to let go of knowing. I won't know. I don't have an ability to know. And, anybody who says to me, oh, well, it definitely was his body. Well, they don't know, you don't know with 100% certainty whether it was or it wasn't, unless, you can have the DNA sequence. It might have very likely been, but you don't know. So I think I've had to just say, okay, I don't know. I need to let go. I need to process and move on. But I think that piece has been a really challenging piece of the puzzle for me, is how do you, this convincing my brain of something and also trying to process through that. Does that make sense? I'm throwing a lot at you here.
No, that's all right. It totally makes sense. And I get it with not being able to almost accept it. When I was a kid, I had a friend that died, and I just kept driving by his house. It was like, I just couldn't believe it. It's like, how is it possible? Did Lucas have any like tattoos or anything to identify him with that way, that they were able to say, yes, this is 100% with certainty him and his tattoos, or the markings, birthmarks, or anything like that?
Yeah, so the body, they claim that the body had a tattoo that he had on it. But again, like,
But you didn't see it.
I didn't see it. So it doesn't make sense. I think it's, I've spent so much time going down this rabbit hole in my own mind of like, why could he still be alive? What are the facts of the case? And I still do believe that the body was not his body. Now, almost every single person in my life would argue that that's completely irrational. And I will say, okay, I understand that. But I still believe that the body is not his body. No, I don't know. He could still be dead, even if it's not his body. I don't know what happened to him. Knowing Lucas, I don't think he would be, but again, I don't know. But I think the challenge has been to just say to myself, okay, KK, you don't know. There's no way to know. You need to let go. And I think one of the things my therapist has said is, how would I act in, what do I do with that information, right? So I have this belief that maybe it's not his body. Now, what do I do with that information?
Right.
Am I like waiting on him to come back? Now that would be a real problem. That would be really not healthy for my life and not healthy for me as a person. And so I think that that's been the kind of key thing for me to focus on, is like, what am I doing with that information? And mostly what I'm trying to do with that information is not spend very much time thinking about it, because it's not a really good rabbit hole for me to go down. So I mostly try to keep myself from thinking about it,
right?
But that's hard. But come back to this belief that whether it's his body or not, whether he's alive or he's dead, what I should be doing on a daily basis shouldn't change. I should be continuing to work on myself and continuing to try to show up as my best self, continuing to try to grow and improve and evolve, continuing to make decisions about my life that I want to make for my life. I mean, even if he was still here and we were in a relationship, I should be doing all those things too, right? Like I shouldn't be making choices solely based on him. When I believe that when a person is in a committed relationship, they shouldn't be making decisions for the other person.
Right.
You make decisions together and compromise, and you decide what's more important and less important to each person, and then make decisions together. But regardless, I should be living my life for me. And so I think continuously trying to bring myself back to that and focus on, okay, what do I know to be true for me? What are the things that I can control? I can control myself. I can't control anybody else. I can't control what happens in the world, but I can control my behavior to some degree, at least in the medium to long term. I think, in an instantaneous response, people have less control than they think they do. But over time, I can work on myself and, process things and do the work to be able to have the responses I want to have in certain situations. So does that answer your question?
Totally. It's crazy. It's a crazy story. I mean, it's tragic, and my heart goes out to you and, his family and anybody that loved him. It's nuts. A little bit of a side topic. I have a question for you, and there's no judgment around this at all because I know that I would have struggled with this personally if I was you. How is your sobriety? Have you remained sober throughout all of this?
Yeah, interestingly, I'm so glad you asked, and I'm very open about my sobriety. I have remained sober, and it has not even been, it's been a thought I've toyed with. Like I've dangled it in front of myself, but I have not, it's like, nope, I don't want to go there.
Good for
Not
you.
worth it.
It wouldn't make
Know where
anything
that
better.
ends.
It wouldn't make anything better at all,
Yeah.
So no, good for you. Good for you. 100%. I mean,
this is kind of my dad would probably be so embarrassed to hear this, but, or whoever this happened. But when I went, this is kind of a longer sort of segue, but you'll find this interesting, I think. The Friday after the body was found, my grandmother passed away.
whoa.
No, that was not, I mean, obviously that's very sad and I loved her, but she was, she had had ammonia and she was in the hospital at the time. And so it wasn't completely unexpected. It was still very sad. I was very close to her and loved her very much, but it wasn't. And the other part is like, she wasn't a part of my daily life the way Lucas was, right? I wasn't interacting with her every day. But I then flew home to Milwaukee to go help my mom sort through my mom and my sister sort through all her stuff. And I remember when I was at home, which this is like 2 weeks after the body was found, and my grandmother had just passed away. And I think my mom, my sister, and I went and did something on Sunday morning, and my dad and my brother-in-law were watching the Packers game. That's what was happening. They stayed home with the kids, my sister's kids, and watched the Packers game. And somebody accidentally left a beer in the bathroom the bathroom of the room that I was staying in. So I got home that night, and then there was this open beer sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow. And my dad, who's, both my parents are incredibly supportive of my sobriety to the nth degree. Somebody just must have been forgetful and not have thought of it, because if they had put the pieces together, they never would have done that. But I remember being like, do I want to have a sip of that beer? And I was like, nope, I don't want to have a sip of that beer. And I took it back to the kitchen. And then the next morning I was like, proudly to my parents, hey, guess what? Somebody left a beer in my bathroom and I wasn't even tempted one little bit. And my dad was like, oh, sorry about that. But it's been, I think one of the silver linings has been the fact that it has made me feel incredibly strong and confident in my sobriety. If I can get through this without wanting to drink, I really feel like, okay, I'm really not going to go there. It's not a coping tool for me. Now there might be, other things that I do that maybe I need to be aware of. I think as I mentioned, one of the things that I have used as a coping tool is running, or really walking, just walking. Like I've had some 140-mile weeks, over the course of the last couple months, but mostly slow pace, just walking. But I just sometimes feel this, I don't know if you've ever felt this before, just like this overwhelm of emotion where I just feel like, oh my God, I can't handle, my body feels like it's going to explode with emotion. And alcohol was very effective for dealing with that.
Short term. Yeah, for sure.
Short term. And running and walking has been very helpful for that. And so there have been some weeks when I've probably pushed the mileage a little bit higher than would be advised by a traditional training plan, but TJ has been really great. And, just saying, just take it a day at a time, do what you got to do, just try to find joy where you can, and I think that's been kind of the worst of my coping mechanisms. That's not terrible. No. I think it's not great for long-term running performance, but that's not what I'm trying to optimize for these days.
Yeah, no, there's definitely worse things you could be doing with your time. So
Okay.
good for you. Totally approved. Get out and walk, move your body. Yeah, sweat, get it out in healthy ways, 100%. So you struggled with alcohol in the past. How has your before all this happened, how was your mental health? Did you have struggles with it, or was it just the addiction portion that you struggled with? Or did you see a therapist before all this happened, or what was that like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, where do I start? I've struggled with mental health stuff probably my whole life, as long as I've known. I was a very happy kid, but very, very perfectionist, people pleaser mindset.
I remember that.
Loved gold stars. So I think I just was a little bit hyper anxious about getting it right and having to please, and hypersensitive to other people's reactions and opinions of me. So that would become internalized, and I felt like I was often kind of putting up facades for other people, what they expected of me. And so I think I probably saw my first therapist when I was in college at some point.
Okay.
And then I've seen therapists off and on for many, many years. And I've always kind of felt like, gosh, this doesn't feel like what's normal, but what's normal? How do you say what's normal? And one of the things I often say is, the drug and alcohol epidemic in our country, I really feel like is a mental health epidemic.
Yes. 100%.
Mental health crisis. And it's people that are trying to self-medicate.
Yeah, 100%.
And I feel like that was a lot of what happened for me. And at first I used food. So I struggled with a lot of different eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder not otherwise classified. And food can be a very effective numbing agent as well. And then when I found alcohol, which was way more effective, I was like, oh, wow, what am I doing messing around with food? This is very efficient. But it was just a tool for me to deal with a mental health issue that I didn't have diagnosed. And so I'm actually bipolar. Oh. My grandmother that passed away in January was bipolar too. And I have a bunch of other family members that are that have been diagnosed with bipolar. And it's something that I've suspected for many years, and my parents have suspected for many years. And I have so many psychiatrists I had gone to see over the years had told me that I was not bipolar. It's a very hard thing to diagnose. So I had not been diagnosed for a very, very long time. And the treatment for bipolar versus kind of traditional depression is very different. So if you're bipolar, you really can't, a lot of SSRIs, traditional antidepressants, are actually quite bad for people that are bipolar for some reason. And that can actually increase suicidal ideation and make things actually much worse. So I'd been prescribed SSRIs by psychiatrists in the past, which had just worked out horribly for me. And so I had just had this kind of visceral reaction to going on drugs because it had just been such a terrible experience. But when I was finally diagnosed and was able to get on the right medication for bipolar, that really did help a lot. So I have been seeing a psychiatrist who's he's a dual diagnosis bipolar addiction specialist. So he's very specialized in both those things. And there tends to be a lot of people that have both those things, as you might imagine, because they oftentimes were trying to self-medicate.
Self-medicating. Yep.
The bipolar with some sort of drug or alcohol. And so I've been seeing him, and then I have this therapist who's been really, really amazing for me, that I talk to 3 times a week. But that I was also, I think, probably talking to her, maybe not quite 3 times a week, but probably 2 times a week, even before this happened. I'm a real big, I'm a talker, as you can tell. And I'm a big believer that, talk therapy can be really helpful, just to have an unbiased third party, or, third party if you're in couples therapy, but an unbiased person to be able to talk to and share your thoughts. And I think it's really important to find somebody that you really trust and feel like you can really say anything to. Like my therapist, I feel like I could tell her anything, like my deepest she knows almost all my deepest, darkest secrets. I mean, if she doesn't know something, it's because I've like forgotten it myself. But I think that's really important. I mean, also, I'm sure you'll relate to this. I think one of the really beautiful things about the 12-step program is having to write down all your demons, essentially, and then go tell that to your sponsor or to whoever you're working with. And that experience of having to really look at yourself critically and say, okay, what are my skeletons in the closet? Because I think for me, I had a very deep fear that if someone really knew me, if they really knew me, they really knew all the dark, deep parts of me, that they couldn't love me, that I was unlovable, I was unworthy, I was not enough. And that's a very destructive belief to have about oneself.
Right.
So the process of actually having to come out and say, oh, this is who I am, all my baggage, and having someone say, yep, you're still okay.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be locked away. That's a powerful experience.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if did you work the 12 steps, and did you have that experience when you did your?
Totally. I had over 100 resentments locked away in my head. And I honestly don't know if that's a big number compared to most people who work the 12 steps. I mean, I'm assuming it is, but yeah, I was told to sit down and write down all my resentments. And as an addict and alcoholic, like I remembered everything. I mean, I went back to first grade, kindergarten, this happened in second grade, third grade. I was pissed about this, and just started going on. And all of a sudden I'm filling up this notebook, and I had a whole mess of them. And like talking that through with my sponsor, it wasn't immediately cathartic. It's not like, oh, I'm better now, but somehow I did feel lighter as the days went on. And, a week later, I'm like, I'm not much of a talker, but that actually did feel good. Like that, like I'm a very introverted person and you're a very extroverted person. I'm guessing I'm assuming I'm right there. So for me, talking and going to therapy is very uncomfortable, and just sharing things with another person is I usually find it pretty uncomfortable. I'm getting better, but just letting all that out to my sponsor was, it was a healing process for sure. And like I said, I didn't just feel immediately better, like right away, but a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I'm like, I'm really happy not to be carrying all that around anymore. I do feel like I just released it, so 100%.
That's awesome. That's so great.
Did you have a hard time finding a therapist that you really trusted, that you can tell all your deep, dark secrets to? Because I've tried therapy. I've only been to a couple of them, and maybe I haven't given it a fair shot. That's highly possible, but I just not only didn't feel comfortable sharing my feelings to a stranger, but like I said, I'm just not really much of a talker. And, it quickly got to the point where my therapist would be like, so how's it going? And I'd be like, I don't know, good. I worked today. It sucked. It's like, what do you want? You got to ask more. You're going to have to ask me more questions to start digging in. But did it take a long time for you, or did you find somebody immediately?
No, it definitely took a while. I mean, as I said, I've seen a lot of therapists over the years. I mean, I think it's almost like, the same as finding a romantic partner. You have to kind of shop around and try them out. And it's kind of a laborious process. It's a pain to do that, but I think it's worth it to try to find somebody that's a good fit. I think there's just so many different styles and different approaches of therapists. Like my therapist, like, actually is much more like a life coach in a lot of ways, which I like. I don't want somebody who's just gonna let me kind of vent and feel sorry for myself. I want somebody who is very kind and loving, but also will be like, KK, maybe you want to think about that one a little bit more there.
Sure.
And really call me out on my stuff, not in an aggressive way, but in a like loving, kind way. Really hold me accountable, because I really want. Why am I going? Why am I going to therapy? Because I want to improve. I want to grow. I want to be my best self. And so, for me to go to a therapist and just say, this person did that, and this is awful, and blah blah blah, that's not helping me in any way. I want somebody who's actually kind of helping me strategize. Okay, maybe let's try this differently, or maybe you didn't act so great in that situation. Maybe you should do something differently next time. So I would say, I don't, it depends. I'm not saying everybody should have a therapist. I think it kind of depends on each person's individual situation. I do think that I don't know how you would feel about this. This is my belief, but there's a lot of stigma around mental health issues, and a lot of stigma around therapy, and a lot of stigma around being on psychiatric drugs. Like it's something I haven't talked about historically, but I'm really trying to make more of an effort, because I feel like a lot of people take antidepressants. A lot of people take, drugs to help them with some sort of mental issue. And if we could start thinking about it more like something like diabetes, if I had diabetes, I would have to take insulin, and nobody would think twice about that. But somehow with like mental health issues, we somehow think like, oh, well, because it's our mind and our brain, we can like think differently. We can choose to think differently, or we can choose to have our brain, operate differently. But for people that have a mental health condition, that's not really how it works. I've definitely tried myself to just outthink it, but it's really hard to do. I haven't figured it out. Maybe some people can.
Totally.
And so I think that kind of breaking that, we really, as a society and as a community, as a planet, need to break that stigma around mental health and say, this is just like, something else that somebody, diabetes or high cholesterol. It's no big deal, just we as individuals need to be responsible for ourselves. I really believe in the sovereign individual. We as individuals we shouldn't really think of ourselves as having rights. We have responsibilities. We have a responsibility to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're not, acting in a way that's a tax on the rest of humanity, right? And so, for me, as a sovereign individual with the responsibility of myself, I need to be responsible for my mental health. I need to either be on medication if that's what's needed. In my case, I feel like it is at this point in my life. I need to see my therapist. That's my responsibility. I need to run, or work out or walk, so that I'm having those sort of healthy chemicals in my body. I need to, do the other parts that keep me being a functional member of society that's not a tax on the system, which I have been in times past. When I was at the height of my alcoholism, I was a tax on the system and not a great human. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I get very passionate. I get up on my soapbox when we're talking about mental health stuff, because it's like the stigma associated with like a lot of the stuff really bothers me. And I feel like it's something that everybody needs to come together and really try to break. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
Totally makes sense. 100%. How long ago was it that you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
So it's actually a pretty recent thing.
Okay.
And it actually took me till this past fall when I quit my job to really have the time to realize what was happening.
Okay.
I think work has also been, you know, I would argue at points in my life, I've been a workaholic, which is it's a socially acceptable addiction.
Right.
And doctors
Right.
love it. But I think that's kind of masked my own awareness of the issue. So when I quit my job and I was really didn't have the structure of a job, it became very transparent to me and to my family that there was something that was not normal going on.
Yep.
And so my dad very kindly helped find this psychiatrist because I just had such bad luck with psychiatrists in the past. And so I guess another thing I would say is just like for anybody that feels like maybe they have a mental health condition to really, you know, try multiple people if you think that you're not getting the diagnosis that you're suspecting in your first, you know, interaction. Because for me, I probably seen like 8 different psychiatrists over the course of my life, none of whom diagnosed me, even though for probably 4 of those, I said, I have bipolar in my family and I think I'm bipolar. And it wasn't until my dad, who is a very thorough researcher and worked in the CIA, that was his first job out of college. So he's a very good spy for all things. He found this psychiatrist who had this dual diagnosis specialty. And once I was able to start working with him, he was able to diagnose me pretty quickly. But that has made a huge difference. Huge difference.
That's what I was going to ask next is, was it like a relief to have that diagnosis? Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Now I can move forward. Or was it more of a shock? Like, oh my God, like I'm mentally ill. Like I'm always going to be on medication. I'm crazy. What was it like for you?
That's a really good question. You know, I mean, I think I'm bipolar, you know, so like I go back and forth between the two sides. But like on some side, it's like, you know, the expression I like to use, somebody gave this to me and it's like my favorite phrase when referring to stuff like this is not mental health disorder or mental health problem. It's neurodivergent. Sounds really cool and sexy, doesn't it? So I'm neurodivergent.
Okay. I'm going to write this down.
But anybody that has a non-normal brain can classify themselves as neurodivergent.
I'll be using it. Believe me.
Go for it. You know, when I'm like in a good headspace about it, I'm like, oh, I'm neurodivergent. Like, and actually there's this really cool book my therapist recommended to me called Driven. You would find this very interesting. It's a great book. And they did this research about people that have D2 and D4 alleles on their DNA. And they have this, they're the hunters of the hunter and gatherer society. Okay. And they tend to be very intense people. And they often are people that end up in 2 places in society. They're like the Elon Musks and Steve Jobs of the world, or they're in prison or dead in a ditch.
Okay.
Or in a psych ward.
Yep.
It's like one or the other.
For sure.
And this book, which is very interesting, I would highly recommend. It walks through kind of like what's the psyche of these types of people and what's related to their DNA. They've actually like sequenced DNA of these types of people, which is like, I think 15% of the population falls into this category. And so like on my good days, I'm like, oh, I'm and people that have these alleles tend to be bipolar. Sometimes they're diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, some sort of neurodivergent categorization, if you will.
Ultra runner, alcoholic.
Alcohol, exactly. Yeah, I mean, as I always say, ultra runners, like all ultra runners have got to have a couple screws loose.
Totally, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So on my good days, I'm like, oh, I'm neurodivergent. Like it's my strength and my weakness that I don't think the same as everybody else. But then, you know, some days I'm like, gosh, I'm I'm like in the rejects pile. I'm like, have to take medicine. I don't fit in with everybody else. I have this like real swings in mood, which can be really a pain sometimes. The medication has helped kind of equalize that a little bit more. Yeah. But it just kind of depends on the day. And I think that's another reason why I feel so strongly about breaking the stigma, because a lot of the times when I feel this kind of sadness or depression around it, it's because of the fact that I'm gathering from the outside world kind of this mindset of kind of shame around mental health issues. Oh, she's crazy. Mm-hmm. Oh, what did he do? And it's like, it's just, the shaming doesn't really serve any purpose, I don't think.
No.
And I think it's just hard for us as a society to help the people that are struggling and really in it to move forward with the shame and the stigma. We gotta get those both out of there, or else people are going to have a really hard time, taking responsibility for themselves. In my opinion, is the only way, if I ruled the world, let me tell you, if I ruled the world, the only way that we would be able to fix the mental health crisis, which is the alcohol and drug epidemic, is that we need to empower the individual to take responsibility for themselves. Put them in the driver's seat for figuring out what's the right approach, what's the right thing for them to do with their health and their mental health and dealing with their past trauma. But the only way we can empower them to do that is if we're able to get rid of the shame and stigma, move those out of the way, and really lift those people up to feel like, okay, yes, I'm doing the right thing here. I'm taking responsibility for myself. I'm cleaning up my mess, And I think it's hard. I don't know what your experience has been in your own kind of journey with alcohol, but for me, like my journey with alcohol resulted in a lot of mess, that I have had to clean up, and some of which is not entirely cleaned up. It's just got a long tail on it. It's going to take time. And so there's a lot of shame and stigma around that. And, if anybody else is in a position where they're trying to really do the right thing and take care of themselves and kind of put their life back on track, that's a big barrier, is trying to get over that shame and stigma. And a lot of times I think what happens is people get a case of the fuck-its. Do you know those?
Oh, I know those well.
And then it's like, why even try with anything? I might as well just go down in flames,
Right.
Which isn't a very effective belief system about the world. But
well, the fuck-its come easy when you're drinking a lot. It's like, okay, I'm gonna quit tomorrow, but tonight, fuck it. Like that's how it was for me for so many years. But with your bipolar disorder, is there any positives? Is there any superpowers in there somewhere? Like, you strike me as someone who's very intuitive, empathetic. Are any of those superpowers that you have? Is there any positives to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are lots of positives. I do. I find, so, bipolar disorder is how do I put this? Like, it's categorized by having sort of bouts of what's called mania. I don't really like that word very much, but that's what they say. Mania, and then bouts of depression, and they kind of vacillate back and forth. And so the medication that I'm on, which is lithium, kind of makes those a little less intense. But they still come and go, to some degree. Like, I can feel kind of those waves a little bit, but everybody has those waves to some degree. We wouldn't be human if we just like totally were even keeled all the time. Right. And that would be kind of boring anyways. But I find that in my periods of mania, which are pretty tempered these days, I find that I often feel a lot of synchronicities. Like I can draw connections between things a lot more easily. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I feel like things come together a lot more easily. I have a lot more creative energy. I really like to write. So like oftentimes that's when I do a lot of writing. And I feel very connected to other people. Like to your point, from an intuitive standpoint, I feel like I can understand people very well. So
that's
I think there are a lot.
That's like textbook for the mania though, right? That's like kind of industry standard, like people who are going through these, I know you don't like the word, but mania, that's when they write a lot, or they get these brilliant ideas, like I'm going to do this, or they paint the inside of the house, or they sleep less. I mean, that's kind of standard though, right?
Yes. I mean, I think it can be channeled in really good ways. I think like, you hear about kind of scary mania when people go and like spend all their money, like they have these brilliant ideas and then they go like buy everything. So that can be like the bad end of the spectrum. Like there are bad parts of mania too, right? But yes, I think that there is, when you've heard about people that have bipolar disorder and have these bouts of mania, it's often people that like are incredibly creative and brilliant, and this is when they have their most powerful work is often during those periods. And so oftentimes it's a very hard thing to treat. And at first I was very resistant to wanting to go on I was resistant to medication at first because I was like, does that mean I'm no longer going to have those periods?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know
losing
if I
parts
want to
of
give
yourself.
that up.
Yeah, totally.
But interestingly, going on medication hasn't like cut those out. I still feel like I have them, but I feel more calm in them, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, I've got to do everything in the entire world right now, right this second. Like, I feel like a lot of energy and excitement, but more calm.
Yeah.
So it's pretty awesome and great.
Yeah.
But, before I went on the medication, I was scared about that because I felt like, gosh, if I don't have that, who am I? Like that's how I think of myself. And I think that's been a reason why, when I've heard of, I watched this documentary about this really famous surfer who really sadly, he was bipolar. I can't remember his name, but he was bipolar and he also struggled with addiction and he ended up dying of a drug overdose. And in this documentary, he talks about the fact that he didn't like being on the medication because he felt like when he was surfing, his mania would help him surf better. Like, because I think what your brain's doing is it's like firing with more connections.
Yes.
And so it's not just for like creative writing, it's also for physical activity, being able to surf and really see the curves of the wave. I think that increases your ability to do that, perhaps. I don't know. I'm not a great surfer. But it was very interesting to watch this documentary and hear him talk about how he just was so resistant to giving that up. The other kind of classic bipolar disorder, this is a fictional character, but that I always think of is, do you ever watch the TV series Homeland?
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Okay, it was a I think it was on HBO, a TV series, and it's about the CIA, and one of the spot like agents is a woman who has bipolar disorder, and she's brilliant. Like she figures everything out way before everybody else does. Okay. But she's crazy. She's totally crazy. It's played by Claire Danes, who does an amazing job in the role. And she's very resistant to the treatment because she wants to she doesn't want to lose this ability to like tap into all these things, right? She was seeing things that other people weren't seeing in the CIA. But anyways, it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was worried about the same thing with medication. I am on 2 different antidepressants, and I was worried about the same thing, like losing parts of myself, losing creativity, losing parts of my personality, and almost becoming like a different person, losing the favorite parts of myself. Like, I am also a creative person. I like to paint. I'm in my studio right now. I got a bunch of abstract art in here. I've done a bunch of writing in the past, and I didn't want to lose that. So I was somewhat resistant as well, but.
And what has your experience been? Do you feel like it's had a negative impact or a positive impact, or what kind of impact?
Taking medication?
Yeah.
Totally positive. But I think there's a feeling out process there. Just like when you're shopping around for a therapist, you have to shop around for the right medication, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. You know, like somebody who is classically depressed, they might take a certain medication and get these certain side effects that the next person doesn't get. So I think there's a bit of a feeling out process there too. But I take Lexapro and Wellbutrin, and for some reason, the combination has really helped me a lot. And that doesn't mean I don't have bad days anymore. I still get down sometimes. I still get depressed once in a while, but I feel a hell of a lot better than I did a couple of years ago.
That is so awesome.
It's been totally positive.
That's so awesome. I'm so happy for you. And how long did it take for you to figure out? I mean, I don't know much about antidepressant combinations, but I would imagine you probably had to play around with different things before you found that combination that worked.
Sort of. So here's my story. So I quit drinking, and then I'm stuck feeling all of these feelings, right? And all the feelings are really heavy. And I think that for some reason, it feels like I'm feeling more than your average person. It's like, I don't know if it's possible to feel more, but I felt like I was feeling more, right? Mm-hmm. And so eventually ended up at a shrink, and I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And then she put me on Lexapro, and it sort of worked, but I was also still at the time using marijuana. And she said that along with this borderline personality disorder comes a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of depression, and she also diagnosed me with ADHD. She said, I think it'd be a good idea if you tried Adderall. Great. I love Adderall. Perfect. I've used it recreationally. Bring it on. Well, it wasn't long before I was abusing the complete hell out of that, and went completely off the rails with amphetamines, with this Adderall. I talked her up in the dosage right away, and then I'm getting just all these pills, and I'm taking a whole month's worth in like 2 weeks, and just going off the rails. So I was taking this Lexapro, but I was going off the rails with these amphetamines. So that's what put me in a 12-step program. I got to a point where I was like, okay, like rock bottom is only as deep as when you stop digging, and I was just like ready to stop digging. I was digging myself into a really deep hole, and I knew things were getting really ugly. Like, I felt like I was about to lose my relationship. I would have lost the place that I'm living. I felt like I was like a paycheck away from flying signs on the street, like I felt like I'm in a bad place. I need to go to strangers and ask for help that have been here before. So I ended up in the 12-step program, and then subsequently ended up going back to the therapist or the psychiatrist. And then that's when they suggested Wellbutrin. And it took a month or so. And then finally I started to level out. No, I take that back. It took about 90 days after I got off of the amphetamines and the marijuana and everything that I was using before I started to level out. And it was a process. It didn't happen overnight, but I'm so thankful that I did get on medication. And I've done the DBT therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, the CBT therapy. And I've experimented with a couple different kinds, and it was helpful. But I think the most helpful thing for me was finding a sponsor that I really identified with, that I had things in common with, that I could feel comfortable sitting down and kind of spilling my guts to. And then also, calling old friends on the phone, somebody I hadn't talked to in 10 years that's, still a buddy, but I just kind of like lost track. We just lost touch, calling them up, getting out of my head by asking them how they're doing and asking them how their problems are. And then also starting this podcast. Like I said, I've always been extremely introverted, and I didn't like talking at all, and almost never talked on the phone. Like I would go a year with only a couple phone conversations. I would text people and stay in contact with them, but I didn't like talking or communicating. So I thought, well, let's start a podcast where I have to talk to people for like an hour or 3 hours every week. And I'm just going to dive into this and just see if I can, quote unquote, get better. And so it's been a process, and I'm still working through it. I'm not perfect, but I feel like I'm on the right road. So
that's awesome. That's such a great story. And I mean, kudos to you for like you felt like you didn't like talking to people. And so you start a podcast where you're going to talk to people publicly. That's pretty impressive. Well, and you're awesome at it. I mean, I never would have known that. Like you strike me as a total extrovert. You seem like a total natural.
Oh God, no.
You make it seem so easy.
Yeah, no, I like my own company, whether I'm reading or writing or painting or running. I do almost all my training by myself, like it's not like I can't communicate or don't communicate with people, but I took the Briggs and Meyer test, I think it was like years ago. I think that's what it's called. And they told me I was off the charts introverted. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's pretty much me. So yeah, it's like the runner or the person who doesn't like running, and then they take up ultra running because they're just forcing themselves to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So yeah, so that's my story, and
that's awesome.
I'm trying. It's a little bit of progress every day, and I feel like I've made a hell of a lot of progress over the last couple years, but I probably still have a long ways to go. So
yeah, it's all about the journey, not the destination, right?
Totally.
I feel like I always say, like, the work is never done, that would make it boring if it's done. There's always more to do.
Yeah.
But kudos to you. It sounds like you've just like tremendous growth in the last couple of years, and
yeah.
This podcast is so awesome.
Yeah, well, thanks. And for me personally, getting that diagnosis was a relief, I guess. And I wanted to get better. And, nobody forced me to go to a 12-step program. I didn't crash my car or end up in jail. And that's why I ended up at a 12-step program. I was like, I need help. I need to go ask strangers, like, how did you do this when you were in my shoes? And I've always been on the path to self-improvement for like the last probably 20 years. And I feel like every year I get maybe like a little more fit, a little smarter. I'll read a couple more books. So I always feel like I've been on this path, but for years I was self-medicating. So I was kind of just stuck in this rut that I couldn't get out of. And after I was diagnosed, she said, well, yeah, that's what you've been doing this whole time, is self-medicating. And I'm like, no shit. Okay. Okay. I guess I'm a genius. Like, I was medicating myself, right?
Totally.
So yeah. Do you feel like you had a handle on your bipolar disorder before this happened with Lucas, or was it all sort of one big storm?
I mean, it was in the process of being worked on, and this experience definitely, I mean, traumatic experiences can sort of kick the volatility into high gear, as you might imagine. Mm-hmm. So in January, I was a very volatile person. I mean, I think even a person without bipolar disorder that has that kind of trauma would be very reactionary. but I was very reactionary. And I remember when I was back home in Wisconsin, there's this moment when I was with my mom and my sister, and I just like, my nervous system was just on overwhelm, and I just like snapped at both of them and like couldn't be around people. I just felt like the world was crushing my entire body, like physically. I just felt like I could not do it anymore. And so in some ways, like, you know, I increased my dose of lithium. So right now I'm on 600 milligrams. At the time I was at like 300, which is a pretty low. Probably I needed to be on a higher dose, but this experience really like made me realize, okay, I really need to focus on this and figure this out. And so I've had a lot more talks with the psychiatrist over that time. So I guess that's a silver lining, is having to figure that out and really get that dialed in. But yeah, I think that for me too, that the diagnosis has been a relief in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, now I know what that's about. Yeah, I did know there was something that was a little off, but now it's something that's like, it is a part of me, but it's also separate from me. It's not what defines me. And it's something that can be treated, you know? And there are things that I have to do for myself to take care of myself besides just take my medication to make sure that I'm healthy and, you know, in a good place. But I think that having that diagnosis has been helpful for my brain to be able to categorize, okay, that's what that is. And I think for me, the biggest part has been trying to think about it as though it were like a disease or a disorder that is not mental. I think we really I have a block with, this is a problem I have, and I'm sure other people have it too, that like, if it's something mental, I can just outthink that. But I've been really trying to think of it something like diabetes, you know, something that has to be treated just like, you know, any other type of disease or disorder that someone would have in their body. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. So what are some of the prejudices that you would like to see gone? Some of the stigmas around mental health? Like, you know, since I was diagnosed, I didn't even know what borderline personality was. And by the way, this is like my coming out party. Like, I've never really told anyone this. And I've told everything else on the podcast. And so this is like the first time I've come.
I feel so honored. Oh my gosh. I should have gotten you a cake.
Oh my God. But you know, sometimes I'll hear jokes about it, like, oh, like that guy must be a little bit borderline, you know, and you hear people mention it like it's, and to me, it's like, it doesn't offend me. In fact, like, yeah, that's kind of funny. Like, I'm redheaded too. And when I hear people make jokes about redheaded stepchildren, I don't get offended. I think it's kind of funny, right? I mean, I have a sense of humor. So like, yeah, it's kind of funny, but I mean, what are some of the stigmas and some of the prejudices that you'd like to see just wiped off the map?
All of them, but I don't know. I mean, I think, gosh, it's a big problem, you know, it's a big issue because it's really embedded in our society, really sadly, these little things that people say. I mean, it's, you know, it's a very different beast than racism, but racism as an issue is very hard to change because it's just, you've got generations of it embedded in cultures and families. And so it's just, it's really hard to reprogram the brain to think differently. Even people that want to, even people, you know, that think, oh gosh, I don't want to be racist. I don't want to think that way. And they're actively trying to be anti-racist. Even then, it's hard to reprogram the brain. I think in the same way, I don't know what the term is. We'll have to come up with some cool, sexy term for like what it is for people having prejudice against people that have mental health issues. But I think that that's it, in some ways has some similarities. It's just like embedded, and we just need to continue talking about it and continue to raise awareness so people realize, oh yeah, I guess that is kind of not cool of me to say whatever this statement is that you just said, oh, he's a little borderline or whatever. I mean, people make comments like that about people that are bipolar too. They're like, oh, she's bipolar. She's really off her right. I mean, those little like comments, even though they seem innocuous or not that big a deal, like they have a sting and effect that's really destructive. And if you're teaching that to children, you know, because really what we should be focusing on is like the next generation. How do we raise children to have a awareness of these issues without the stigma and shame associated with that? Because probably most of us, we're lost causes. Like for us to try to reprogram our brains, probably it's going to be quite difficult. We're not going to be able to do that. I mean, we should still have the awareness and talk about it, but what we really should be focusing on is like the children. How do we teach them to realize, okay, there's nothing wrong with this? And I haven't told my kids that I'm bipolar, but they know that I have mental health issues. You know, they know that I go see a therapist. They know that, you know, there's stuff going on. And I try to talk to them about it in a way that has no shame and a stigma associated with it. When I talk about it, I try to say, you know, talk about it confidently, openly. My ex-husband, who's an amazing co-parent and has just done an incredible job with the girls, he's been really wonderful talking to them about it. So I think it's like those little things, just having positive conversations about it. I think also really commending people for doing what you did, which is really freaking hard to do. To like go and say, hey, go to a professional, say, go to a shrink. Hey, I don't know what's going on here. I'm feeling some stuff. I don't think it's normal. I don't know. That's hard. Yeah. But like, we should be like applauding people that do that and putting them up on pedestals and like showing them off to the world, because that would encourage other people to go do that as well. Yeah. And it's not so bad once you do it. Actually, like it's great for people like you to share your story and for people to hear, oh gosh, wow, he went and figured this out and now he's happy. Now life is good. I mean, not every day, but like now you feel good. Wow. Okay. Maybe I should go do that too. You know, I think we need more people to be talking about it. So kudos to you for sharing. I feel so honored to be on your coming out podcast. Oh my God. I think that's what we need. We need more people to come forward and be like, hey, here's my stuff. Yeah. You want to see my skeletons? You want to see my dirty clothes? Let me show you.
Yeah. I mean, part of me sobering up and going through that whole process was like sort of putting my dirty laundry out there but feeling good about it. Like, okay, I don't really have any secrets anymore. Like all my secrets are out. And that's sort of how this feels too. It's like, just put all your freaking secrets out there. Like I don't have any secrets from my podcast listeners or my fiance or anybody at this point. It's like, there's nothing left. Like, you know, it's like, it's very freeing. It feels really good. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but and
I want to hear, have you guys set a date and a spot for your wedding? I remember we talked about it when I was on the podcast in the fall, but what's the latest there?
August 11th, weather permitting, we're going to be going to the top of a 14er. And saying vows. Yeah, it'll probably just be us and a photographer and maybe our puppy.
Oh my gosh.
Very low key, and then celebrate afterwards. So yeah.
Oh my God. Of course. Top of a 14er. No big deal. That's awesome. That's Come on. So awesome. It's
like Colorado style. That's how you do it out here.
Oh my gosh. So cool.
Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to it. And you know, that was kind of a big thing for me too, is just like, once I was diagnosed, it's like, oh, well, that's why all my relationships have been so messed up over the years. like, sure, I took a fair amount of responsibility, but that it just kind of explained a lot, you know? And it's like, I'd always had a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of depression, but I didn't feel like I fit like into those boxes. Not like I could go into a doctor and say, look, I'm depressed. I need medication because I'm a depressed person. That's not really the case. Like, you know, good days, bad days. And so, the diagnosis just kind of made sense, and I was able to move forward from there. So
That's awesome.
I'm curious, like, do you have any spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs or anything like that? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in anything out in the universe?
I do.
This is a big question, I know. A big loaded question.
They're a little wacky and crazy.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
So I definitely believe there's something more than just this, which is here that we perceive.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, and I feel like anyone that says that they know is a little bit, you know, disillusioned, because how can you possibly know? There's no way to know, right?
Right.
What I say on my Instagram profile is that I'm an omnist, which is a person that believes in all things. So I actually believe like all different religions have a lot of truth in them.
So
I believe.
Yeah.
Gosh, no wonder we get along so well. So I think there's a lot of truth in all religions, and I actually think like if you read, you know, the Quran and you read the Bible, and like there's a lot of similarities. We're all kind of saying the same thing.
Totally.
And I think we're just kind of splitting hairs on the specifics. Mm-hmm. So, but I think there is something more, and I believe like, and I don't know how to describe this. I think actually, as science advances, which science has been advancing quite substantially, particularly now with COVID expediting a lot of stuff and increase of technology, you know, a lot of science is explaining some of the religious phenomena that have happened in the past. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard of the body of science, quantum physics, or there's this great book that I highly recommend called The Physics of God, which talks about, you know, a lot of the different elements of like what, you know, what I feel is like there's some sort of energy inside me, a soul, a spirit, something. What is that? And I think science, as science advances, and maybe it already explains this and it's just beyond my level of comprehension, we'll be able to explain like what that is in a scientific standpoint. But I do believe that there's something, some part of us inside, some energetic piece of us inside that can't ever be destroyed, and that when we die, that exits our body and goes someplace else. I don't know where. Does it go into another being? Does it go into another part of the earth? Does it go to another part of the universe? I don't know. I think maybe all those things are possible. But I do feel like there's this sort of connection that we have with each other that's greater and deeper than what we see here and that we can feel here. It's like this energetic sort of soulful connection. And kind of to go back to this thing about Lucas, you know, I really felt like he was my human. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Like I really felt like our souls were just like made for each other. And what do you call that? Like a soulmate? So do I believe in soulmates? I don't know. I really felt like with him, my soul was like made to be with his. That's how I felt. But I think I don't believe in soulmates. I think I believe in this concept called soul families, which is something actually a friend of mine that I met in rehab, who's one of my very good friends still, introduced me to this concept of soul families. And he's in my soul family. And the idea is that you have these humans whose soul you are just very deeply connected to. It's like the type of person that you meet and it's like instantaneously you just like totally connect with them. You feel this just really strong connection. And so if I have that belief system kind of spiritually, then there could be multiple people that I could end up in a romantic relationship with potentially. But but those soul family members can also end up being your like closest friends or your closest, you know, maybe relatives in your family, relatives in your actual family. So I think from kind of a religious, spiritual standpoint, that was your question. I don't go to any church or follow any sort of religious doctrine. When I was a kid, I went to Episcopalian church on Sundays growing up, and I would go to church. Like if I'm down in Florida visiting my grandmother and it's Christmas time, I'll go to Catholic church with her, but I don't practice anything. But I do feel like a spiritual practice is very important. And for me, that's like a lot about tuning into myself. So like for me, the spiritual part is like connecting with my own soul and understanding, okay, what do I really feel in me? And what do I feel like is the right way I should be in this world? Does that make sense to you?
Totally. Yeah, for sure. And I part of the reason I asked was just curiosity, I guess. But like I said, you strike me as someone very intuitive. And so I was wondering if since Lucas has passed on, whether you believe he's really passed on or not, like, have you gotten any signs from the other side? Like when I had a very good friend that passed away, and he and I were Nolan's 14 buddies. We had scouted the whole line several times. In fact, my last podcast was just me like telling all the Logan stories. Logan was a good buddy of mine, and we spent a lot of time on the Nolan's 14 line, scouting this thing backwards and forwards. And when he passed away in a skydiving accident. And when he died, I honestly feel like he came to me for just a moment and he was laughing and he said, well, looks like you got to do Nolan's all by yourself now, buddy. And that was it, you know? And I was just wondering if you felt anything like that, if you've noticed anything from Lucas or not.
It's a very interesting question. And again, I'm going to take you to the side that most people get very uncomfortable with, because
the woo side,
because I do feel like I'm quite intuitive in that way. I mean, I don't know, how do you verify that information, but my soul tells me he's still here, and that he's still here on this planet alive. Mm-hmm. And then I have often felt, not often, but at multiple times since he's disappeared, I felt this feeling like my soul's talking to him, and that there's this like secret pact going on where like our souls both know about it, what's happened, why he's doing this, what's going to happen. But I don't know right now. Mm-hmm. But this feeling of like, he's going to show back up and it's all going to be okay. Mm. And it's all going to work out in the end. And we're going to be like laughing and like, ha, ha, ha. It has not been a laughing matter these past couple months, let me tell you. It has not been a laughing matter. But somebody actually suggested to me that I go talk to a psychic medium, because I was feeling this so intensely. So I reached out to a psychic medium, and this is very interesting. I didn't tell her anything. And it was a Zoom call, but it was a person that had been referred to me by actually a guy that works at Method 7, this company, this sunglass company. These are my cool Method 7 glasses.
Nice. Aviator. I like them.
Yeah. I ran Moab 240 in these, the whole Sweet. 240 miles. They were awesome. Anyways. So one of the guys that works there, I was talking to about this issue, and he recommended that I talk to a psychic medium that he's worked with. And so I had this Zoom call with her, and I didn't tell her anything about it, but it was a psychic medium session, and we get on the phone call, and Zoom call, and she's like, okay, I'm here with your grandmother. And I hadn't told her anything. And my grandmother, as I just told you, had passed away this past January. And I was like, oh, no, that's not who I'm trying to connect with. Poor grandmother's like, what are you doing over there? You know, like, but I was just I wasn't expecting that. You know, that wasn't the purpose of why I was reaching out. I was telling my mom, my mom, this story. And I was like, yeah, Mom, I got to go back to the psychic medium so that I can tell Kaka I'm sorry. My mom's like totally does not believe in this stuff at all. She thinks it's totally crazy and insane and that it was a waste of money that I paid for this woman. But anyway, so after the psychic medium tells my grandmother to, you know, go away, she's like, okay, I don't have anybody else here. And I'm like, okay, well, there's somebody else I need to connect with. And she's like, nobody else is here. Can you tell me the person's name? So I told him her name. She's like, Lucas Huron. Nope. He's, I don't feel him. Is it possible he could not have passed to the other side? And I said, it is possible. Actually, you're gonna get a piece of information in this story that nobody, well, close friends and family know, but nobody else really knows. Like there were some like Reddit blogs that caught the story Reddit channels that caught the story in January. Oh my God, that was awful. There was like all these channels that were like KK did it, and
oh my God.
But anyways, there's a lot of information if you wanted to go find in the internet about like the facts of the case. But this is one of the things I'm going to tell you here isn't really out in the public anywhere. So you will be the first to know this. So we went on and we're talking, and she's like, did he have a habit of disappearing when he got upset? And I said, yes, he did. She's like, did you guys get in a fight that day? And I said, yes. I mean, and like both these things, I was kind of like, well, you know, she could have just guessed those things. Who knows?
Yep.
And so did you guys get in a fight? Okay. And then the one thing that really caught me was she said, did you send him an email? Did he run away because of an email? And that night, after we'd had this text message exchange and he was out, you know, said, I'm going to be hanging out with my neighbor. And I said, I was going to be working on Christmas presents and we were going to meet the next morning at 7 a.m. I was at the house. And 2 nights before we had gotten in a fight, not a fight really, but we had gotten in like a little spat. And I had written, I was like observing what was happening between the two of us in this scenario. This was 2 nights before this happened. And I wrote it all down in an email after it happened. And I wrote the title of the email was like, Dear Digital Diary, you know, December 21st or 22nd or whatever date it was. And I had this draft email, and I sent that draft email to him at like 9 p.m. that night because I wanted to talk to him about it the next morning. And it was like, you know, there was some stuff in there that, gosh, this is like really hard to talk about. I mean, it was a pretty honest recount of what had happened. And we both were like, especially him, not on his best behavior. So to read it would have been probably a painful thing. And the only reason I sent it to him was because I thought that we were in this good place. We just had this like argument during the day. I said, oh, thank you so much for the meteor. Let's go this Saturday. Let's go this Saturday to pick it up. You know, we felt like we were in this good place. He says, oh, I'm so glad you liked it. I'm going to be over at 7. I felt like we had like navigated through that. And I was like, wow, we're such adults. You know, we get in an argument, instead of like getting all angry at each other, we like take time apart and now we're good. So I was like, okay, I want to send him my thoughts on this so that we can talk about it in the next morning. And it ate away at me for very long until it just was eating away at me that he had read that email and was like, oh gosh, I can't handle it. I'm out of here. And it just like resulted in a psychotic break of some kind. And it was just awful. And I got into his email maybe a week later or 2 weeks later, because he had a laptop at my house. And so when I got into the email, that email was left unread. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe he didn't read it. And that was like a huge relief to me. Okay. But when I talked to the psychic medium, she said she said this thing, did you send him an email? And I was like, yeah, I sent him an email, but I don't think he read it. And she said, oh no, he read it. He just marked it unread. And I was like, what? That's really weird. That's really weird.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That really like threw me for a loop. And again, like coming back to this was probably 2 months ago, or when did I do this? I can't remember. I think it was like late March that I had the call with her, the psychic medium. So not 2 months and a half ago. And like, that kind of threw me into this spiral of like, oh my God, he's still out there. She actually, to her credit, I was like, okay, do I go looking for him? Like, if he's still alive, like, what do I do with that information? And she was like, no, you can't go looking for him. This is not behavior to be reinforced. He left because he wants you to try to follow him. And that can't be reinforced. So you can't do that. He'll reemerge when he's ready. When he feels safe, he'll reemerge. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, I asked her, when do you think that would be? And she said, I think in August. So we'll see. But I'm very, this is something I'm very honest with my therapist about, very honest with my psychiatrist about. My poor psychiatrist is like, oh my God, this girl, higher meds. But I think it's like, comes back to this thing I was talking about earlier, where it's like, what do I do with that information? You know, mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah. That could just be like the craziest coincidences of all coincidences, you know, sure. I don't even know if I believe in that stuff. I think I do, but I don't know.
Right.
And like, so I just can't, I try not to think too much about it, which is hard. And then I try to turn back to myself. Okay. How am I acting? What am I doing? Am I working on myself? Am I showing up as my best self? Am I continuing to grow and evolve? Like trying to come back to that and not trying to go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what happened. Because that was, for a while there, I was like really, obsessive about figuring it out, mm-hmm. trying to find out like what happened to him. Where did, and even if he is dead, which is a very plausible scenario, most people think that's what happened. Mm-hmm. Like knowing how it happened, like really wanting to know all the details of every piece of it. But I think at this point, for my mental health, since that's the topic du jour, bringing it back to that, I think for my mental health, I've just had to say, okay, KK, you can't know. You gotta live your life, mm-hmm. and it'll reveal itself when it reveals itself. Maybe that's not until I pass away and I'm on the other side and he's over there and he's like, huh, you thought I would, let me tell you what happened. Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I won't know until I know. One thing that Lucas always used to say, which he had so many good Lucasisms, truisms that he would have. And one of them was, when you stop looking, it will appear.
Yeah.
And he meant that about like physical things. Like if you're looking for your keys and you can't find them, you're looking all over the house. And it's like the second you stop looking, then it's like, oh, here they are, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also about like truths. It's like, if you're looking for something, like it's really hard to figure it out. But the second you like let your mind back off of it, it like pops up. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever had that experience.
Yeah, totally. No, it makes sense. Listening to you talk, it almost seems like you're going through like an awakening process. And I could be way off there, but, and I don't even know 100% what that means, but I feel like, in order for the world to sort of heal itself, I heard another podcaster named Paul Chek say that more people have to wake up. And he said like 30% of the world is awake right now. And we have to get to the point where it's like 51% of the people before real change will really happen. And for a lot of people, the awakening process is a long, painful process where you go through a lot of it's the journey that you're going through. But nowadays it seems like you hear of star seeds being born, and like kids that are born, they're already awake. Like it's almost like the world is going through an awakening, and it feels like, I could be way off, that you're sort of going through this process too. And I'm not saying that your bipolar has anything to do with that, or Lucas has anything to do with that, but it just seems like you're someone who's awake and you're trying to sort of put the pieces together. Does that resonate at all, or am I way off base?
No, it resonates a lot with me, and I do feel that very deeply. I think it's, it's hard, because if that's true, I would agree with that. I agree with whoever this podcaster is that you just referenced, that only 30% of the world is awake, and
it seems right. Yeah.
And that we are in this process of awakening. Well, then that makes it very hard if you're trying to awaken yourself, because a lot of the people that you're interacting with are potentially not awake. And so you might be having these realizations or understandings or truths that are coming up for you. But if you're expressing those to the people around you, they might be giving you feedback like you're crazy.
They're not going to hear it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So that's been a struggle. And I think that's probably for anybody going through that process, they deal with that, knowing who's safe to talk to and who's not safe to. And I think I don't know. I'm still, if that's what's happening, I'm still very much in it. But I do think, us as a society needs to have more awareness. I mean, maybe that's what awakening is having more awareness and more consciousness.
Consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah. And collective consciousness, all of us together, right? Really understanding each other deeply and being very connected at that level. But
yeah, it's like one of those things that I don't know if I believe in 100%. And it's like you mentioned this about religion. It's like, there's not one particular religion that I identify with, but I think there's truths in all of it. And when I hear someone talk about that awakening process, it's like, yeah, there's definitely some truths in there. And I like to believe it's true. And I like to believe that conversations like this would help facilitate that in some way or another, just like talking about our struggles and what it's like going through what we're going through. Hopefully other people can identify and say, well, I'm not the only one kind of going through this, whether it's an awakening process or just like self-healing or whatever the hell it is we're doing, KK. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, what we really need for the world to awaken is for people to feel safe to be able to come out with all their truths. And I really do feel like, everyone, I think most people have skeletons in the closet. Everyone's got a little baggage. Yeah. I've got a lot, but like everybody's got a little something. But if everybody felt comfortable coming out and saying, being authentic, being real, being genuine, but really authentic about who they are. And I think there's two obstacles to that. One, it's actually knowing who you are. I think a lot of people don't know themselves really.
Yes.
They're so conditioned by the external, world and what society tells them they should be, that they're programmed themselves to be that thing. And they don't even have any sense of themselves. That was me.
Yes.
I had zero sense of myself. You gave me a day to not do anything and it terrified me. I didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
So that process of like being able to understand, who am I, both the good, the bad, the ugly, all the pieces, and really be honest and aware of that for myself. That's the first step. But then the second step is like actually coming out and sharing it with the world, with the public, which is scary, especially when you've got as much crap in your past as I do. It's like, it's painful. People pass judgment, they say mean things, they call you names. I should tell you, like, yeah, it's just, there've been a lot of people have said a lot of not nice things to me about, stuff that has happened in my past. And, I get it. Yeah, it's not ideal behavior, but there's nothing I can do about it now. We're here sitting here today. Like all I can do is this next day forward. Yeah. So I think it's those two things that we need everyone in society to be able to do: awareness of themselves, who they are, being honest about that, owning their own stuff. I think that's another thing people have a really hard time doing it. You know, it's really painful to say, okay, what am I doing wrong? How did I screw up there? I mean, I think that's like with this experience with Lucas, and it's been excruciating. Like, yeah, one of my favorite phrases is, I might be getting this wrong. No one's to fault, everyone's to blame. Or everyone's to blame, no one's to fault. I can't remember which one it is. But essentially the idea that, like, yes, I contributed in some way to this happening. Yeah. Everybody did in some way, right? But I can't blame myself. You know, that's not healthy. There's no way to move forward in my life if I blame myself for what happened to Lucas. But there were pieces of what happened that I was not acting as my ideal self. Now, it's unrealistic to expect that I'm going to be my ideal self 100% of the time. That's my perfectionism, thinking that I can achieve that. I can't, right? I'm going to screw up all the time. But what I can do is I can go back and I can look and see, okay, what are the things that I would have done differently there? What other choices could I have made that would have been better? You know, and my therapist has been really helpful in helping me do that in a way that's healthy, because I think there's a very destructive way to do that, where you're ruminating about it and a lot of negative self-talk, especially in this situation. But really owning my own stuff there, and really then working on those things. So as you said, you know, was my bipolar fully under control when this all happened? Arguably not. You know, I was only on 300 milligrams of lithium, which is not a super high dose. And Lucas knew that. I mean, he knew that it was something I was working on. But, you know, that's something that for me, I'm like, gosh, I want to make sure that this is under control so that I don't ever have that be an issue in my relationships going forward, you know? And like, there were other things happening. That's not like the only thing that was going on with him and I. And like, you know, it's also just the randomness of the universe to some degree, but I think having people that are really willing to own their stuff and own their mistakes is really important, but it's painful.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's much easier for someone to say, well, I did this wrong because that person did this to me, or I'm unhappy because of this over there. It's really hard and painful for someone to say, okay, I am my own responsibility. If I'm unhappy or if I'm not feeling good, I need to make a change. Now, maybe that's going and asking someone for help, or maybe that's setting a boundary with someone, or maybe that's changing a situation, but it's my responsibility. It's not okay for me to just bitch about, you know, XYZ person or XYZ situation. That doesn't do anything. But sadly, a lot of people do that because it's easier.
Yeah, do the work, right? I mean, it's hard to do the work. It's painful. Like, I've done some hard shit in my life, but getting sober and facing myself, like naked, you know, facing my problems, really digging deep, getting inside of my head and figuring out why I'm doing these things. That's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but one of the most rewarding. Like, I'm able to hold my head up now. I you know, like I said, I don't have any secrets anymore. It's all out there. And I feel much more free now. And I'm not the model citizen for this sort of thing, but I feel like I'm at least on the right road, you know? Yeah. KK, this has been awesome. How do you feel?
I feel so good. Can we do this every day?
Yes. We should check in more regularly because
I know.
Yeah, no, this has been a great conversation, and I think that it could just probably go on forever. And I hope people are going to dig it. People really dug the last conversation with you, so this has been awesome, and I can't wait to meet you someday and just give you a hug, because my heart goes out to you, and I feel like we've had a connection, and yeah, you're cool as shit.
Likewise. You can look up Castle Peak 100K. It's an awesome course. You should come out to California to do and come stay in my awesome guest bedroom. You and your your then wife.
Yes.
I think it's under August. So you guys will be married by then.
When is the race?
When is it? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
It's normally at the end of August. I don't know what the schedule is for this year, but maybe you guys could make a little California trip. Do you have honeymoon plans yet?
Nothing crazy. We're just going to spend a couple weeks in the mountains. We just built out a van. So we have this van that's all decked out.
Dream.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my gosh.
So we're going to drive around and just live in the van for a couple weeks, and that's pretty much going to be it. But we have plans to make it out to California because she's from San Diego and she wants to go back out there and show me around. And I haven't spent a lot of time out there. So
amazing. Well, come up to the Bay, and you guys should definitely come make a stop. I'd love to meet you both, and you can stay at my house, which is like 20 minutes from Pacifica Beach. You can go do some surfing, paddleboarding.
So cool.
Would love to have you guys and toast your recent nuptials.
Totally. And by the way, did I know you were from Wisconsin? Because I'm from Wisconsin. Did you know that?
No way. I didn't know that. Where in Wisconsin are you from?
Janesville, an hour and a half away from Milwaukee.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It is crazy.
In Fox Point, which is a little bit north of Milwaukee. Yeah.
Wow.
That's awesome. I knew I like all the Wisconsin people.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Good
totally.
Midwesterner.
God, there's so many Wisconsin people out here in Colorado. It's nuts. I'll be out in way out in the middle of nowhere on some mountain. And you know, it's like I'll see one person all day, and that one person I see has a Badger shirt on. And of course they're from Wisconsin. And I'm like, of course. There's one more thing we have in common. So
yeah, well, it's been such a pleasure. I had such a great time doing this with you, and would love to come on anytime again in the future. For
sure. Well, I can't wait to hear about Cruel Jewel. So you go out there and be super strong, and I want to hear all about it.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. KK, thank you. I appreciate you. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks.
I'll talk to you soon. Yes.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.